The ivory dress was still hanging on the door when they came for her. Eleanor Voss had not yet slept. She had not been able to. Outside her window, Ashenvale's carriages would begin arriving at dawn. She had counted the hours, pressed her palm flat against the window pane, watched the dark road below the way a woman watches for something her whole life has been building toward. By morning, she would be a duchess. By morning, everything her father had quietly, patiently hoped for her would finally arrive. She did not hear the lock turn. She did not hear the footsteps. She only heard her stepmother's voice, low, unhurried, the particular calm of a woman who has already decided. Get up. You are going somewhere. They did not let her take the dress. Before we go further, if you have ever stood at the edge of something you spent years waiting for and felt it taken from your hands in a single moment, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Because what happens inside Ashenvale Estate in the weeks that follow is not simply a story about cruelty. It is a story about what happens when the wrong person underestimates the right man. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's begin. Her name, before all of this, meant something. Eleanor Voss was the only daughter of Mr. Edmund Voss, a gentleman of modest estate but considerable reputation, a man known in 3 counties for his honesty in his library and the quiet way he raised his daughter after her mother died. Eleanor had her father's eyes and her mother's hands and a mind that, under different circumstances, might have frightened people. She read in Latin. She corresponded with her father's solicitor on matters of estate law. She could identify every piece in a Beethoven sonata by ear alone. She was 23 when her father died. Lady Hargrove, her stepmother of 4 years, did not weep at the funeral. She stood at the graveside in expensive black silk and calculated. She had married Edmund Voss for security and received less than she expected. The estate was modest. The income was modest. But the daughter had drawn the attention of the Duke of Ashenvale, and a duke's proposal, even a conditional one, carried a bride price. Lady Hargrove collected it in full. What the Duke did not know, what no one knew, was that Lady Hargrove had simultaneously signed a second document, a contract of domestic service, forged in Eleanor's name, transferring her labour to Ashenvale Estate for a period of 3 years. A different kind of arrival, a different kind of life inside those same stone walls. She also wrote a letter. In Eleanor's handwriting she had practiced for weeks, addressed to the Duke, explaining, with cold precision, that Eleanor had reconsidered, that she could not go through with it, that he should not come looking. By the time Eleanor understood what was happening, she was already in a hired coach moving through the dark. Her wedding dress hung untouched on the door of a room she would never re-enter, and somewhere across the county, in a great house full of lit windows, a man was reading a letter that would hollow him out completely. The carousel of misery, as they say, does not announce itself. It simply begins. Eleanor arrived at Ashenvale Estate before sunrise, handed to a housekeeper named Mrs. Fenn, with nothing but a small bag and a contract. Mrs. Fenn looked at her the way experienced women look at young ones, who arrive without explanation, not unkindly, but without sentiment. She was shown to a room the size of a cupboard. She was given an apron. By 6 in the morning she was on her knees in the kitchen. She did not cry. She had decided, somewhere on the road, that she would not cry until she understood what had happened. Understanding required clarity. Clarity required composure. She scrubbed the floor, and she thought. And the more she thought, the more the shape of it became clear. The bride price, the forged letter, the speed of it all. Lady Hargrove had planned this before the Duke had even proposed. The other servants were not cruel. They were simply indifferent in the way of people who have their own burdens. Eleanor learned quickly which tasks were hers, which rooms she was to avoid, which hours were safest for silence. She kept her hair covered. She kept her eyes down. She answered to, "Girl," and "You there," and once, memorably, the quiet one. She was careful never to be memorable, because Eleanor Voss had realized something in those first cold mornings on the stone floor of Ashenvale's kitchen. She was inside his house. The Duke she was supposed to marry was somewhere above her in these same rooms, sleeping in these same walls, breathing the same cold air. And if he found her, if he saw her like this, she did not know which would be worse, his pity or his contempt, if he believed she had truly run. She scrubbed harder. She kept her head down. She did not look up when she heard boots on the flagstones above. She was very nearly managing it. The Duke of Ashenvale had not been managing at all. His name was William Cavendish, and he was not, by nature, a demonstrative man. Those who knew him described him as composed, precise, the kind of man who reads a contract 3 times before signing and remembers every word of every conversation he has ever had. He had not proposed to Eleanor Voss impulsively. He had watched her for 2 seasons, her precision, her humor, the way she argued a point without needing to raise her voice. He had decided, with the same deliberateness he applied to everything, that she was extraordinary. The letter had arrived the morning of the wedding. He had read it 4 times. Then he had set it down on his desk and sat very still for a long time, the way a man sits when something has knocked the architecture out of him entirely. Then he had gone about his day, and the next day, and the day after that, but he had not stopped thinking about it. Because the letter did not sound like her. He could not have explained this to anyone. It was the words, the structure, the particular emotional logic of it. Eleanor Voss argued in paragraphs. This letter argued in sentences. Short, final, cold. It did not sound like the woman who had once spent 40 minutes explaining to him, in precise and passionate detail, why Handel was structurally superior to Mozart. He sent inquiries, quietly, through his solicitor, to the Voss estate. He received polite deflection from Lady Hargrove. Eleanor had gone to relatives in the north, she believed. She could not say exactly where. She hoped the Duke would find happiness elsewhere. He noted that Lady Hargrove had moved into the Voss estate's primary rooms within a fortnight of the wedding date. He noted that Eleanor's personal correspondence had ceased entirely. He filed both observations carefully and kept looking. He was still looking when he returned to Ashenvale on a grey Tuesday afternoon in November, 3 weeks after Eleanor had been scrubbing his floors. He saw her from the upper corridor. She was crossing the entrance hall below with a bucket, moving quickly, head down, cap pulled low. Something stopped him. He did not know what he had passed, dozens of servants in this hall in his lifetime, and noticed none of them. But his hand found the banister, and he stood very still. She moved the way Eleanor moved. That particular quality of self-containment, of a person carrying more than what was visible. He watched her reach the far door, push it open with her shoulder hands full and disappear. He stood at the banister for a long time after she had gone. He did not go after her that day. He was not certain, and he was not a man who acted on uncertainty. But that evening, he called Mrs. Fenn to his study and asked, with no particular emphasis, when the new scullery maid had arrived. Mrs. Fenn checked her ledger. 3 weeks ago, she said. Contract arranged through an agency. Name listed as E. Marsh. William Cavendish looked at the name for a long time. E. Marsh. He closed the ledger. He thanked Mrs. Fenn. He sat alone in his study until the fire burned low. Then he opened the drawer of his desk and took out the letter, the one he had read 4 times on the morning of his wedding. And he read it a 5th time, then a 6th. Then he sent for his solicitor. Eleanor became aware that something had shifted on a Wednesday morning when she arrived in the kitchen to find her heaviest duties quietly reassigned. She said nothing. She assumed Mrs. Fenn had reorganized. But the following day she was moved from floor scrubbing to silver polishing closer to the main house, warmer, quieter. The day after that she was asked to assist with the library. The library. She stood in the doorway of it and felt something move through her that she did not have a name for. Floor-to-ceiling shelves. A fire already lit. The smell of old paper and good wood. She had grown up in a library like this. She had learned Latin in a room like this. She pressed her hand against the doorframe and breathed. She did not notice the Duke standing at the far window until he spoke. The Cicero has been misfiled, he said, without turning around. 3rd shelf, between Seneca and Virgil, which is chronologically defensible but alphabetically an offense. Eleanor did not move, did not speak. Every instinct told her to retreat. He turned then, and for the first time in 3 weeks, William Cavendish looked directly at Eleanor Voss, Neither of them spoke for a very long time. "I am not going to pretend," he said finally, very quietly, "that I do not know who you are." Her chin lifted, just slightly, the way it always did when she was deciding whether to be afraid or to be precise. He had always loved that about her the moment before she chose precision. "Then you know," she said, equally quiet, "that I did not write that letter." "Yes," he said, "I know. If you're still here, and I believe you are, then you already understand what is coming. But I want you to understand why it comes the way it does." William Cavendish did not go to Lady Hargrove. He did not send constables. He did not make a single visible move. He simply continued building his case, the solicitor, the forged signature, the bride price receipt, the agency contract, and he waited. Because he had learned, by watching Eleanor, that the right moment to act is not the first moment available. It is the moment that cannot be undone. Leave a comment below, tell me whether you saw this coming or not. And stay with me. We are almost there. Lady Hargrove arrived at Ashenvale 3 days later. She had heard, through the county's efficient social channels, that the Duke remained unmarried and was receiving visitors. She came in her best carriage with her daughter Cecilia, fair, presentable, carefully rehearsed, and a social confidence built on the assumption that her crime was buried in a domestic service ledger no one would ever read. She did not know that Eleanor was in the house. She could not have known. Eleanor saw her from the upstairs corridor. She watched the carriage arrive, watched Lady Hargrove descend in burgundy silk, watched Cecilia smooth her gloves. She felt something go very cold and very still inside her. Not fear. She had moved past fear weeks ago on a stone kitchen floor. What she felt was closer to recognition, the particular clarity of a woman who finally sees the full shape of what was done to her. She went back to the library. She continued filing. The dinner was that evening. 20 guests. The long table in the formal dining room, candlelight, the county's finest. Lady Hargrove was seated 3 places from the Duke, which was close enough to perform, and far enough from power to be tolerable. Cecilia was placed across from a baronet's son, and applied herself to the project of being charming. Eleanor was serving. She had known she would be. She had dressed carefully, cap straight, apron clean, expression entirely neutral. She moved through the room with the composure of a woman who has decided that composure is the only weapon available to her and has sharpened it accordingly. She was pouring wine at the sideboard when Lady Hargrove turned in her chair. The recognition was instant. Lady Hargrove's face went through several things in rapid succession. Shock, calculation, and then, fatally, the particular panic of a woman who has always solved problems by attacking them first. "Stop." The table went quiet. Lady Hargrove rose from her chair. Her voice, when she spoke, was loud enough for the room but aimed precisely at Eleanor. "This woman," she said, "is a runaway servant. She broke a lawful contract of service and disappeared 3 weeks ago. I demand she be removed from this house immediately and returned to the authorities." The room was absolutely silent. Eleanor did not move. She set the wine down very carefully on the sideboard. She straightened. She looked at Lady Hargrove with an expression of complete, devastating composure, the expression of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this. The Duke rose from his chair. He did not speak immediately. He picked up his glass. He took one unhurried sip. He set it down. Every person at the table watched him do this. Then he looked at Lady Hargrove with the particular attention of a man who has been patient for a very long time and has finished being patient. "Lady Hargrove," he said, "you have just described, in front of 20 witnesses, a contract of service you claim to have issued. I would be very interested to know the date on that contract. A beat, because my solicitor has in his possession a bride price receipt, signed in your hand, dated the same morning, along with a letter, also in your hand, forged in Miss Voss's name, along with a service contract, also your signature, arranged the night before what was to have been Miss Voss's wedding." He paused. "I have been building this case for 3 weeks. I was waiting," he said simply, "for you to say her name in public." Lady Hargrove sat down, not gracefully, the way a person sits when the floor has gone out from under them. Cecilia stared at her plate. The baronet's son found somewhere else to look. The 20 guests at William Cavendish's table were very quiet and very still, in the way of people who are watching something they will describe for the rest of their lives. The Duke walked the length of the table. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of Eleanor. He did not announce anything. He did not make a speech. He simply looked at her, the way he had looked at her from the upstairs corridor 3 weeks ago, certain about the one thing that mattered. He took the serving cloth from her hands and set it on the sideboard. Then he offered her his arm. Eleanor Voss looked at it for one moment. Then she lifted her chin precisely the way he remembered, and she took it. They walked out of the dining room together. The table watched them go. No one spoke. Lady Hargrove was not prosecuted. The law in such matters moved slowly, and William Cavendish was not interested in spectacle, he was interested in finality. What happened was quieter and more complete. The bride price was recovered through civil proceedings. The forgery was documented and filed. Lady Hargrove's solicitor advised her, in the gentlest possible terms, that she would find it prudent to retire from society entirely. She did. Slowly, then all at once, in the way of women whose social standing depends entirely on no one looking too closely. The wedding happened 6 weeks later. Small, deliberate, on their own terms. No county spectacle. No performance. Mrs. Fenn wept openly in the third pew and made no attempt to stop. The Reverend, who had been briefed on the full situation, delivered the shortest homily of his career and considered it his finest work. Eleanor Voss became Eleanor Cavendish on a grey morning in December in a small stone chapel on the Ashenvale grounds. That evening, they held a quiet dinner, just the two of them, in the formal dining room. The same table, the same candlelight. Eleanor sat at the far end, in the chair that had been Lady Hargrove's 3 weeks before, and looked the length of the room at her husband. "You waited 3 weeks," she said. "I needed the right moment," he said. "You could have told me sooner. In the library." "You needed to know," he said, "that I had already handled it. Not that I was going to." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the tall windows, Ashenvale's grounds were dark and cold and entirely theirs. "That," she said finally, "is either very arrogant or very kind." "I hoped," he said, "it was the second one." She picked up her glass. She looked at him across the long table, the same table where she had once stood with a serving cloth, where she had lifted her chin and chosen precision over fear. "It was," she said. "Thank you for staying to the very end. If Eleanor's story moved something in you, if the image of a woman lifting her chin in a room that tried to make her invisible stayed with you, then do one thing right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Not a casual forward, a deliberate share, to someone who needs to be reminded that the right people are still looking. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of you matters to this library. Until next time, the doors are always open.